Hello, I'm Pam Giganti. At the end of this year's special legislative session, a major education reform bill was passed, then signed into law by Florida Governor Rick Scott. It includes new provisions for the state's public schools, such as mandatory recess. But the biggest and arguably the most controversial new provision is state-mandated funding for charter schools. That means more than $400 million earmarked for public schools will now be shared with charter schools as well. And as you might imagine, that's not sitting well with everyone. Here in South Florida, reaction has been swift from school officials already dealing with what they feel are tight budgets. The latest reform of Florida's education system by the state legislature appears to pit the state's public school districts against privately run charter schools. The law allows $419 million of taxpayer money to now be shared with charter schools. Like public schools, charters are tuition-free and rely on funding from federal, state, and local tax money to operate. But unlike public schools, these institutions are privately owned and operated, and often offer admissions based on certain criteria. Proponents of the new law argue the state funding is needed to help charter schools with construction and maintenance costs. It also supports a provision called Schools of Hope, which will allow charter schools to set up shop in neighborhoods where traditional schools have continuously failed. The new law also increases per-student spending by $100. But South Florida's superintendents say it still won't make up for the millions of dollars expected to be lost by this new law.
We stand to lose about $13 million next year that will be diverted out of our classrooms, and up to $100 million over the next 5 years. We believe that's a disservice to our public schools, it's a disservice to our students, and certainly is not what our taxpayers intended when they put forth dollars for public education in the state of Florida and right here in Broward County.
We believe that the school districts and the services they offer, particularly in a system like Miami-Dade, where we have over 120 charter schools, we are districts that believe in choice. Charter choice, magnet choice, career academies, K-8 centers. This law certainly favors one element of choice at the expense of others, and I think that people ought to decide whether or not that's in the best interest of their children.
In a statement to South Florida PBS, Palm Beach County Public Schools Superintendent Robert Avosa says, "This is a sad day for students in Florida. It is unfortunate that this bad legislation, crafted in a backroom deal in the last days of the legislative session, is now law." The outcry from thousands of parents, community members, and educators from across the state fell on deaf ears. We need to remember House Bill 7069 and the lawmakers who helped to make it happen and hold them accountable at election time. Well, we reached out to the two South Florida legislators who helped to craft this bill, both with affiliations to charter schools. In direct response to Palm Beach Superintendent Avosa's comment, Representative Manny Diaz Jr. says this: "This is a great day for parents and students in Florida, and our voters have spoken loud and clear that they in fact want educational choice. I think the superintendent should concentrate on his job, providing a high-quality education for all kids and not concern himself with elections. He should worry about being accountable to the parents who have kids sitting in failing schools right now," end quote. Representative Michael Baleka says in part, "Despite what the stakeholders in the status quo might say, HB 7069 will do more to help close the achievement gap and offer hope to students and families who have been left behind by a broken system than almost any other piece of legislation in the state's history. HB 7069 puts students and families first, plain and simple," end quote. Well, joining me now to help us break down the very latest in this education reform is Dr. Dana Mills, Associate Dean and Professor at the Abraham S. Fischler College of Education at Nova Southeastern University. Dr. Mills, thank you so much for being here.
Great. It's great to be here. Thank you.
Wow, controversial on both sides. You can see the emotion from the superintendents, and you can hear the powerful words from the men who helped to craft this education reform in Tallahassee. So help break it down for all of us, put it in layman's terms, because it can be a bit confusing for parents who are really the consumers here. Can we see public schools and charter schools live side by side?
We absolutely can, and I guess a couple of things too. If we step back for a second and we think about the elements of HB 7069. There are many facets to it, and you touched on a couple of them that we can't dismiss. So the mandatory school recess was really an outcry that parents had really been pushing for quite some time, and that is part of this initiative, as is an increase in teacher benefits. So teachers who do an exceptional job in the classroom will actually be compensated at a greater level than they were in the past. So it's important to understand that we can't just pull out the parts of this bill that we're not comfortable with, but we do need to look at the entire bill. In terms of specifically can charter schools and public schools live in harmony, it's occurring now, and certainly in communities throughout South Florida, the state of Florida, and nationwide, there are great examples of charter schools that are really flourishing. The fact is that it's not a matter of the charter school being a less than option, or in some ways taking advantage of a system of funding in Florida. It's finding the right match as a parent, which charter school or public school environment, or even a private school, that best matches the needs of a child. And that's the perspective that parents really need to start to take, is focusing more on what school is best going to meet the needs of my child.
All right, so speaking of parents and the needs for their children, we went out in the community and we have some sound from some moms talking about both charter and public schools. So take a listen.
Right.
It's very important for children to be in charter school because it's more of a hands-on, one-on-one, and they can get the help that they need more so than a public school. Public schools is not so much, but they do the best that they can.
I have a baby now who's not ready for school, but when we consider where to send her, I would think about bringing her to a public charter school, because the neighborhood schools leave a little bit to be desired. So, and we can't afford private school. So I like the idea that the public charters have some accountability with their teaching standards, but that it's still free.
There are some good charter schools, there are some terrible charter schools. Most of them are as good or as bad as the public school system. What we need to focus is on what do the students need, where are the students, where are the vast majority of the students going to school, and that's the public schools.
I pay taxes, and I want to see my taxes go where my child goes, where I went as well at one point as a child. And I prefer a public school system. I live 2 blocks away from a public school, and we're very happy with our public school. We just need to see a little bit more money go to that, and to the funding for the projects that they have, maintenance, programs for the kids. And personally, I'm not too happy about charter schools taking that money.
All right, so speak to that, Dr. Mills, if you will. And obviously, some public schools in certain communities are going to be doing really well, and the parents are going to be very happy, as you heard that one mom. And then there are others who have the perception that just by nature of being a charter school is going to be better. But that's not necessarily always the case, right?
That's absolutely correct. A couple of things. One, it's important to note that the assessment procedures that schools go through, so the grading system and the fact that students have to take standardized tests, those requirements are the same whether you're a charter school or a public school. So there's information that will be available to parents to be able to see how that school is performing. Is the school consistently performing at a high level,
Sure.
A level of excellence? Have they slid or improved? All that information is publicly available. Every county in the state has to publish that information. So it's important that parents look and see how is that school performing. In terms of the matching, you heard a couple of the moms talk about that it matched their students' needs. Each child has different needs, and it's difficult oftentimes to say, well, the charter school or the public school really is the best match for my kid. As a parent of 2, I'm going through this right now with my own 2 children, my son entering high school, my daughter entering middle school. I know that they'll both do will both do well in different environments.
Sure.
And part of it is trying to figure out which environment works best. I'm fortunate to live in an area where there are charter schools that have done a really good job and have a long history of success, and certainly that was a consideration for my son for high school. But again, it's important to recognize that match. Each charter school will have a particular emphasis. There are charter schools that focus on an arts-based education, some that focus on a religious-based education, some that are STEM, that's science, technology, engineering, and math oriented. So if you have a child that is interested in any of those areas, or in some cases children that maybe don't do so well in the structured public school environment, the charter school could be an option for them. So you definitely don't want to look at it as all charter schools are, some standard way, and it's either charter or public. You really want to get into the nuances, and part of it as a parent is learning about what the mission of that charter school is and how it was designed.
You have to do your homework as
Absolutely.
a parent, no doubt. But let's talk about the money aspect, because basically that's kind of what a lot of this boils down to.
Sure.
Because as an outsider looking, anybody who would see this it looks as if the public school system is going to be hurting in some way. The money, all the money that they used to get, they're not going to be getting all of that money anymore. Whatever district you live in here in South Florida, those districts didn't share money before with public schools. Now they do with the taxpayers' money that they get. So are public schools going to be hurting, or do they have to just look at how to allocate funds in a better way? Well, how would you answer that?
Well, a couple of things. One, in Palm Beach, I know one of the major issues is that there are none of these schools of hope. So you heard the governor refer to that, that schools that have had failing grades for 3 consecutive years, those will be the areas that are targeted for charter school development. Palm Beach County doesn't have any, yet they're losing some of their budget. So in their minds, I certainly understand where they're coming from. Why should I have to pay into the system when my county is actually performing at a high level? In other areas, the fact is that we have to do something. There are these schools that are failing consistently year after year. The state takes money away from them anyway. So, in many cases, a lot of those funds will just simply be reallocated. So rather than continually being put into those failing schools, they'll now be shifted over to the charters. Will that mean that some tough decisions will be made and potentially programs could be cut? Yes. I mean, the money absolutely is going to need to come from somewhere. And overall, each school district will be losing some dollars. So there's no question that it could hurt some programs. And again, parents want to pay attention to the decisions that the superintendents are now making and make sure that their voices are heard and that they're involved in that process and reaching out to school board members to say, hey, I want to have some say as to where this money is being cut.
Well, and getting back to the schools of hope, because part of that plan, a charter school that is allowed to go into a community where there's been a consecutively failing public school, that charter school has to show that it has a good track record, does it not? Because anybody could say, oh, let me just start a charter school, but maybe there's no great oversight. They take this taxpayer money, state money, federal money, and then the school fails.
Right.
And that's a big concern. So these charter schools that are allowed to go into these communities, if I'm hearing you correctly, need to have shown a track record of being high-performing schools.
That's right, and there are, if you look at the ratings of charter schools that are published by the counties, you'll see that in many cases there are charter schools that come in and out and they're gone in 2 or 3 years. That's the big concern, is that if we're building a school that's only going to disappear in 2 years in these areas where it's most needed, that could be problematic. So, but again, if you look at the charter schools that flourish, there are some that have long-standing histories of 15 or more years of receiving grades of A and being quite successful. So as parents, you just need to be aware of which charter schools are coming in. Any of those that are corporately funded and part of the large charter school corporations, you can do your homework, look to see how they've performed in Florida, and you can feel pretty comfortable if you have a Franklin Academy coming into your area that's been quite successful. Just as an example, if they're opening one in your area, chances are it's probably going to be quite successful.
Okay, and then let's talk about, there has been money that has been allocated for schools. For example, in Broward County back in 2014, the $800 million bond was passed to go into helping with construction, et cetera. And then Palm Beach has a 1-cent sales tax that was passed in order to put more money back into the schools. Is any of that going to be affected and have to now go to charter schools, or is that going to stay within the public school system to help make those repairs to the schools that really need them?
That money won't be touched. So this is only for new construction of new schools.
Okay, so that's good to know.
Yeah.
And then just talk about the profit boon for charters. I mean, some of them are privately run. Is there some oversight to see how that money's being used?
In general, no. I mean, they certainly need to be sure that they're allocating money that their per pupil spending is equivalent to what it would be in the public school system. Again, at the end of the day, I think that the one thing that we all want to realize is that the governor and all the representatives are all trying to improve education. We may have differing opinions as to how that can be done, and I'm fortunate to working at NSU and teaching in the College of Ed. I deal with a lot of these superintendents and the Mr. Runseys and Mr. Carvalho's, I've been fortunate to be in meetings with them and understand how they think. And a lot of what's happening here is you have a group that's coming in with a different perspective.
Yeah.
So they're protective. Our superintendents are very protective of the way that they're doing things and really do want to make sure that things aren't going to be disrupted. But generally speaking, the allocation of funds isn't all that different. It's really on the construction end. A lot of the charter schools, when they receive criticism, it's that they receive all this money in that construction, and that's where a lot of that money is made.
We're going to have to watch and see how all of this plays out, won't we?
Absolutely,
now that
yes.
it is law here in Florida. Thank you so much. We really appreciate your perspective on all of this.
Great. Thanks for having me.
And if you have a comment or a question about the state's new education reform, visit our Facebook page and give us your take. You can post a video or leave a comment. You can reach us on Twitter and on Facebook at YourSouthFL. We look forward to hearing from you. Funding for charter schools. That means more than $400 million earmarked for public schools will now be shared with charter schools as well. And as you might imagine, that's not sitting well with everyone. Here in South Florida, reaction has been swift from school officials already dealing with what they feel are tight budgets. The latest. Hello, I'm Pam Giganti. At the end of this year's special legislative session, a major education reform bill was passed, then signed into law by Florida Governor Rick Scott. It includes new provisions for the state's public schools, such as mandatory recess. But the biggest and arguably the most controversial new provision is state-mandated Schools of Hope, which will allow charter schools to set up shop in neighborhoods where traditional schools have continuously failed. The new law also increases per-student spending by $100. But South Florida's superintendents say it still won't make up for the millions of dollars expected to be lost by this new law.
We stand to lose.
This reform of Florida's education system by the state legislature appears to pit the state's public school districts against privately run charter schools. The law allows $419 million of taxpayer money to now be shared with charter schools. Like public schools, charters are tuition-free and rely on funding from federal, state, and local tax money to operate. But unlike public schools, these institutions are privately owned and operated, and often offer admissions based on certain criteria. Proponents of the new law argue the state funding is needed to help charter schools with construction and maintenance costs. It also supports a provision called school